5. New insight into a chaotic scene after the wife of Eric Bieniemy, the former assistant head coach of the Washington Commanders, was shot multiple times in the couple's Ashburn home, and now their son is facing charges.
Oh, they're breaking down the door.
A new detail just surfaced from the criminal complaint in the Mia Bieniemy shooting, and it captures how close the 57-year-old wife of Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy came to not making it out of her own Ashburn home alive. For the first time, we're seeing the precise path of the 2 bullets that struck her upper body, the emergency surgery that followed, and the fact that a portion of the projectile is still lodged inside her. At the same time, Loudoun County Sheriff Mike Chapman has confirmed that Mia herself placed the frantic 911 call after being shot by her 27-year-old son. And investigators are making a quiet but very deliberate choice. They are releasing almost nothing about motive or the moments leading up to the gunfire, a decision that says a lot about how tightly this case is being controlled. In this video, I'm breaking down every confirmed development, starting with what the complaint, the sheriff's statements, and the court filings actually show. The location is Ashburn, Virginia, a suburb in Loudoun County, roughly 30 miles northwest of Washington, D.C. It's a large, well-known planned community, home to a mix of families, tech workers, and, as it turns out, an NFL coaching family that kept a residence there dating back to Eric Bieniemy's time with the Washington Commanders. The address in question sits in the 20,000 block of North Park Drive, inside the One Loudoun development, a mixed residential and retail area known for its shops, restaurants, and townhomes rather than for police activity. That's part of why this hit neighbors so hard. It's the kind of neighborhood people describe as quiet, safe, and unremarkable, right up until the night it wasn't. According to the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, deputies were dispatched to the home at approximately 7:32 in the evening on Sunday after a report of a shooting. When deputies arrived, they found an adult woman suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. She was rushed to a nearby hospital for treatment of what authorities initially described as serious injuries. Neighbors described a heavy law enforcement presence descending on the block that evening, multiple patrol vehicles, officers moving in and out of the townhouse, the kind of scene that turns a quiet Sunday night upside down. One neighbor's home security camera reportedly captured footage of someone being carried out of the home by officers, and separate footage shared with local media shows deputies leading a handcuffed man from the property. Authorities have said the arrest itself happened without incident, and Elijah Bieniemy was formally booked into the Loudoun County Adult Detention Center in the early morning hours on Monday. One detail that stands out from the sheriff's own account: Mia Bieniemy made the call to 911 herself after being shot. Loudoun County Sheriff Mike Chapman confirmed that detail directly to reporters, describing an investigation that's still working to establish exactly where everyone in the home was and what happened in the moments before deputies arrived. One Loudoun itself is worth understanding for a moment, because it shapes how surprising this news felt to the people who live there. It's a large, master-planned town center built over roughly the last 15 years, combining townhomes and single-family houses with a walkable retail and dining district, movie theaters, and community green space. It's the kind of development real estate listings describe as family-friendly, and it draws residents who work in the technology corridor of Loudoun County, in government roles tied to nearby Washington, D.C., and, apparently, in professional sports. It is not an area with a reputation for violent crime, which is part of why a shooting there, inside an occupied home, involving a recognizable family, generated the kind of immediate local news coverage and social media attention it did. It didn't take long for the identities involved to become public. ESPN was among the first national outlets to report that the woman shot inside the home was Mia Bieniemy, the wife of Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. Local Virginia outlets and the sheriff's office subsequently confirmed the connection, along with the fact that the home is owned by the Bieniemy family. According to Loudoun County property records, Eric and Mia Bieniemy purchased the North Park Drive home in July of 2023, around the time Eric Bieniemy was serving as the Washington Commanders' offensive coordinator, and the family kept the property even as his coaching career later took him to UCLA, the Chicago Bears, and back to Kansas City. Mia Bieniemy is 57 years old. Beyond her connection to her husband's coaching career, she has largely stayed out of the public eye, described by at least one neighbor as part of a close, faith-oriented family that appeared to get along well within the community. That description, offered in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, stands in stark contrast to what unfolded inside the home that night, and it's part of why the story has resonated the way it has. This isn't the profile that usually accompanies a domestic shooting investigation, at least not from the outside looking in. What we do know medically is more specific than the initial multiple gunshot wounds language police used the night of the shooting. According to the criminal complaint, Mia Bieniemy was shot twice with a .22 caliber Ruger firearm, sustaining injuries to her left forearm and left shoulder, with the projectile path described as traveling across her chest. She underwent surgery following the shooting, and according to that same complaint, a portion of a projectile remains lodged inside her body even after that surgery. By Monday, Chiefs head coach Andy Reid confirmed publicly that she was in stable condition, that is meaningful progress, from the serious injuries language used by police in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, but it does not erase the severity of what she went through. 2 gunshot wounds with a path crossing her chest, emergency surgery, and a retained fragment are not minor details. They reflect a genuinely life-threatening incident that she is still recovering from. The complaint also notes that Mia Bieniemy, her son, and 2 other people were inside the home at the time of the shooting. Authorities have not identified those additional 2 individuals publicly, and it remains unclear what role, if any, they played in the events of that evening or in the 911 response that followed. The son at the center of this case is Elijah Zion Bieniemy, 27 years old, listed by authorities as a resident of Ashburn. According to a criminal complaint filed in the case, Elijah also lived at the home where the shooting occurred, meaning this was not some outside intrusion or a random act of violence involving a stranger, but something that happened within the family's own residence, involving people who lived under the same roof. He was taken into custody in connection with the shooting and, as noted earlier, was booked into the Loudoun County Adult Detention Center in the early morning hours on Monday. The sheriff's office confirmed he is being held without bond. According to Loudoun Now's review of Virginia court records, Elijah Bieniemy does not appear to have any prior criminal record in the state. The charges against him, as confirmed by the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, are malicious wounding, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, discharge of a firearm inside a dwelling. Let's break down what each of those actually means, because the terminology matters, and it's often misunderstood or oversimplified online. Malicious wounding, under Virginia law, is a serious felony that applies when someone causes bodily injury to another person with the intent to maim, disfigure, disable, or kill them. It is distinct from a lesser charge like unlawful wounding, which typically applies when the injury results from an altercation or provocation rather than a premeditated intent to seriously harm. The fact that prosecutors chose malicious wounding rather than the lesser charge signals that, at this stage, they believe the evidence supports an intent element. But that determination will ultimately be tested in court, and Elijah Bieniemy has not been convicted of anything. He is presumed innocent unless and until a court finds otherwise. Use of a firearm in the commission of a felony is essentially an enhancement charge. It exists to add a mandatory, consecutive penalty on top of whatever sentence results from the underlying felony, in this case, the malicious wounding charge, specifically because a firearm was involved. Discharge of a firearm inside a dwelling is a separate charge tied to the fact that the shooting occurred inside an occupied residence rather than, for example, outdoors or in an unoccupied structure. Virginia treats discharging a firearm within a dwelling as its own distinct public safety offense, separate from any injury that results. Together, these three charges reflect the severity with which Loudoun County prosecutors are treating this case. This is not being charged as a minor domestic dispute. It's being treated as a serious, potentially violent felony matter. In terms of what these charges carry on paper, malicious wounding in Virginia is classified as a felony, punishable by 5 to 20 years in prison, along with a fine of up to $100,000. The firearm enhancement charge adds a mandatory minimum of 3 additional years, served consecutively rather than alongside any other sentence, since it's a first offense for Bieniemy under that particular statute. The dwelling discharge charge adds further potential prison time on top of that. Added together, legal analysts who track Virginia sentencing have pointed out that a conviction on all 3 counts could theoretically expose Elijah Bieniemy to a combined range in the neighborhood of 10 to more than 30 years, depending on how a judge weighs each charge. That is a maximum potential exposure figure, not a prediction of what any actual sentence would look like. Real-world sentencing depends heavily on plea negotiations, sentencing guidelines, and the specific findings of a judge or jury, and it's still far too early in this case to say which of those paths it will take. According to online Virginia court records, an arraignment originally scheduled for Monday morning in Loudoun County was continued, and a public defender was listed as Elijah Bieniemy's attorney of record at that point. The next scheduled court date is a preliminary hearing set for August 31st. That hearing will be an early test of the evidence prosecutors have gathered, though it is not a trial, and will not resolve guilt or innocence. It's simply the next scheduled step in what is likely to be a lengthy legal process. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office has been fairly restrained in its public statements, which is typical for an active investigation involving a still developing case. What they have said clearly is that they do not believe there is any ongoing threat to the public. That statement matters, because it tells the surrounding community that this appears to be an isolated, contained incident, rather than something with broader danger attached to it. What investigators have not said is anything definitive about motive. They have not detailed what triggered the confrontation, or what was said or done in the moments leading up to the shooting. They have, however, addressed one related question directly. Sheriff Mike Chapman confirmed there had been no previous incidents reported at the Bieniemy home. In other words, this was not a residence with a documented history of police calls or prior domestic disturbances on record, at least none that the sheriff's office has disclosed. That's a meaningful data point, even without a motive attached to it, because it tells us this appears to have been an isolated event rather than the escalation of a previously known pattern. This is the point where a lot of casual social media commentary tends to fill in blanks with assumption, and it's worth resisting that urge. Whatever ultimately explains what happened inside that home on Sunday night will come out through the criminal justice process, through the preliminary hearing, through any indictment, through eventual trial testimony or a plea agreement, not through comment sections or anonymous online chatter. Eric Bieniemy was not at the home when the shooting occurred. He was roughly 1,000 miles away, at Kansas City Chiefs training camp in St. Joseph, Missouri, fulfilling his duties as the team's offensive coordinator during the opening stretch of camp. ESPN confirmed his location that evening, and it lines up with the Chiefs' broader training camp schedule, which had the team working through camp sessions in St. Joseph at the time. Training camp is typically one of the most demanding stretches of an NFL coach's calendar. It's when position groups are installed, depth charts start to take shape, and coordinators spend nearly every waking hour on the practice field or in film sessions preparing for the season ahead. For a coordinator returning to a franchise for a second stint, with a new group of assistants and players to evaluate, it's an especially intensive period. That's the backdrop against which this news reached Bieniemy. not during a quiet off-season lull, but in the middle of one of the busiest and most important stretches of his professional year. Once news of the shooting reached the team, Bieniemy left training camp to be with his family. Head coach Andy Reid confirmed that departure directly, and as of the most recent reporting, there is no set timetable for when Bieniemy will return to the team. Reid's comments made clear that the organization is treating this as a family matter that takes priority over football, at least for now. With Bieniemy away, the Chiefs have leaned on the rest of the offensive staff to keep camp running. Passing game coordinator Joe Bleemeyer and offensive line coach Andy Heck have stepped up to expand their responsibilities in Bieniemy's absence, helping keep installation and practice planning on track while the team waits for his return. It's a practical, business-as-usual response from the coaching staff, even as everyone involved acknowledges the situation driving it is anything but business as usual. The Chiefs released a brief statement acknowledging the situation, saying simply that they were aware of the incident involving Eric Bieniemy's family. It was a short, careful statement, which is standard for organizations navigating an active criminal case involving an employee's family member, especially one that involves a young adult's, arrest, and a still recovering victim.
She's a saint. We all know that, the people that know her. One of God's good blessings right there now, really special person. So, but things happen, things happen and you got to work through it. And so that's where we're at right now.
Andy Reid, however, spoke more personally about it during a Monday press availability. He extended his sympathy to Bieniemy and his family, describing them as having a strong support system both within the organization and beyond it. He noted that Mia Bieniemy's condition was stable, calling that a positive development, and he spoke warmly of her character, describing her in personal terms as someone widely respected among people who know her. Reid emphasized that the priority right now is for Bieniemy to take the time he needs with his family and that football would simply have to wait. That kind of response from a head coach isn't just boilerplate. Reid and Bieniemy have one of the longest-running coaching relationships in the NFL, spanning more than a decade across 2 separate stints together in Kansas City, so his comments carry the weight of a real personal relationship, not just a corporate talking point. To understand why this story has drawn so much national attention, it helps to understand exactly who Eric Bieniemy is within the football world, because his name carries real weight. Bieniemy, 56, played running back in the NFL during the 1990s for the Chargers, Bengals, and Eagles before transitioning into coaching. His coaching career took him through the college ranks at Colorado and UCLA before he joined the Minnesota Vikings staff, and eventually back to Colorado as offensive coordinator. In 2013, he joined the Kansas City Chiefs as running backs coach, working under a coaching staff that would soon be led by Andy Reid. In 2018, Bieniemy was elevated to offensive coordinator in Kansas City, stepping into that role right as Patrick Mahomes took over as the team's starting quarterback. What followed was one of the most productive offensive stretches in recent NFL history. Under Bieniemy's coordination from 2018 through 2022, the Chiefs led the league in scoring average, ranked among the very best offenses in total yardage, and captured 2 Super Bowl titles following the 2019 and 2022 seasons. Despite that success and multiple interviews for NFL head coaching vacancies over the years, Bieniemy never landed a head coaching job of his own, a storyline that shadowed his career and was frequently discussed throughout his time in Kansas City. After the 2022 season, Bieniemy left Kansas City to become the Washington Commanders' offensive coordinator and assistant head coach, taking on full play-calling duties for the first time in his career. That season didn't go as hoped. Washington finished 4-13, and Bieniemy was not retained once the franchise brought in a new head coach. From there, Bieniemy returned to the college game in 2024, taking over as offensive coordinator and associate head coach at UCLA. That stint lasted a single season, with the Bruins finishing 5-7 and Bieniemy departing at the end of the year. In 2025, Bieniemy moved back to the NFL as running backs coach for the Chicago Bears, working under head coach Ben Johnson. It turned out to be a strong year for that group. The Bears' run game ranked among the best in the league, the team won the NFC North and advanced to the playoffs. Then, earlier this year, the Chiefs brought Bieniemy back home, naming him offensive coordinator once again after Matt Nagy's departure, reuniting him with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes for the 2026 season. It was framed across the league as a natural, almost nostalgic reunion, a proven offensive mind returning to the place where he'd found his greatest success, right as the team looked to bounce back from a difficult prior season. That's the context that makes this story land the way it has. This isn't a peripheral figure in the NFL. This is a two-time Super Bowl winning coordinator, closely tied to one of the league's most recognizable dynasties, dealing with a deeply personal and painful family crisis, just as he settles back into a job he's held before, at a franchise where he's a familiar and respected figure. Beyond the football headlines, there's a quieter, more human layer to this story that's been emerging through neighbor accounts. Descriptions of the Bieniemy family from people living around them have painted a picture of a household that, from the outside, seemed unremarkable in the best sense of the word. A family that got along, that neighbors had no particular concerns about, that fit into the fabric of a fairly typical suburban community. That's part of what makes cases like this so unsettling for the people living nearby. It's rarely the household that raises red flags in advance. It's often, as here, a family that neighbors would have described as stable and pleasant, right up until a single night changes everything. That disconnect between outward appearance and what apparently happened behind closed doors is a recurring and painful theme in domestic violence and family-related shooting cases generally, and it's worth acknowledging without pretending to know the specific dynamics at play inside this particular home, because those specifics simply have not been made public. With charges filed and a preliminary hearing scheduled for August 31st, the case now moves into the standard rhythm of the Virginia criminal court system. At a preliminary hearing, a judge examines whether prosecutors have presented enough evidence to establish probable cause that the alleged crimes occurred and that the defendant committed them. It is a lower evidentiary bar than a full trial, and it typically determines whether the case is certified to move forward to a grand jury or circuit court for potential indictment, rather than resolving guilt. Because Elijah Bieniemy is being held without bond, he will remain in custody at the Loudoun County Adult Detention Center through that hearing, barring any successful motion to reconsider his bond status. Given the nature of the charges, a violent felony involving serious injury and a firearm, courts in Virginia are often reluctant to grant bond in cases like this, particularly when the alleged victim and the defendant share a residence, since safety concerns for the victim typically factor heavily into that decision. From here, several paths are possible, though none can be predicted with any certainty. Prosecutors could proceed to trial on the charges as filed. They could negotiate a plea agreement, as happens in the overwhelming majority of criminal cases nationally. Additional charges could be added if further evidence emerges, or in rarer cases, charges could be reduced or dismissed if the evidence doesn't ultimately support them. As of now, none of that has happened, and anyone claiming to know the eventual outcome is speculating well ahead of the available facts. It's also worth noting how these cases typically unfold in terms of visibility. Preliminary hearings in Virginia are usually brief, procedural, and can sometimes be waived or continued to a later date if either side requests more time to prepare. It would not be unusual for the August 31st date to shift, especially in a case that's already drawing significant public attention and where the medical recovery of the victim may still be ongoing. If an indictment follows at the circuit court level, that typically opens the door to pretrial motions, discovery of evidence between prosecution and defense, and, eventually, either a negotiated resolution or a trial date. Cases involving family members as both victim and defendant sometimes move differently than typical criminal matters too, since prosecutors often have to weigh the wishes and welfare of the victim, in this case, Mia Bieniemy, alongside the public interest in prosecuting a serious felony. None of that changes the charges currently on the books, but it does help explain why cases like this can take months, sometimes longer, to reach any kind of resolution. It's worth stepping back for a moment to talk about the broader category this case falls into, without drawing conclusions about this specific family. Cases involving violence between family members inside a shared home are, unfortunately, not rare in the United States. Family and intimate partner violence cuts across every income level, every profession, and every type of neighborhood, including ones that look, from the outside, like the version of the American dream this Ashburn community represents. What's often true in these situations is that outward stability doesn't guarantee internal peace, and that the people closest to a household are frequently the last to know when something is deeply wrong inside it. None of that is a claim about what happened between Mia and Elijah Bieniemy specifically. We simply don't have those details, and speculating about mental health, prior conflict, or any underlying cause would be irresponsible without confirmation from investigators or the court record. But it's a useful reminder of why these cases deserve careful, fact-based coverage rather than rushed narratives built on assumption. Beyond the Chiefs organization itself, reaction across the NFL world has largely mirrored what you'd expect for a story involving a well-known coordinator's family. Expressions of concern, well wishes for Mia Bieniemy's recovery, and a general sense of shock given how unexpected this news was, arriving right in the middle of the league's training camp period, when attention is usually focused entirely on roster battles and season previews rather than off-field family tragedies. Reporters covering the Chiefs at camp described the mood around the story as somber, with players and staff largely declining to comment beyond expressing support for Bieniemy, which is a fairly standard and respectful response to a sensitive, ongoing personal matter involving a colleague's family. It's a reminder that even in a league built around competition and public performance, there's an unwritten code around moments like this. Teams tend to close ranks, offer privacy, and let the person at the center of the story set the pace for how much, if anything, gets discussed publicly. Bieniemy has not personally addressed the situation in detail, and given the ongoing legal proceedings involving his son, it would be unusual for him to do so beyond the general comments already relayed through Andy Reid. That silence isn't an admission of anything. It's standard practice for anyone connected to an active criminal case, on the advice of virtually any attorney. To bring everything together in one place, Mia Bieniemy, 57, was shot twice with a .22 caliber Ruger firearm inside her family's Ashburn, Virginia home on Sunday evening, sustaining injuries to her left forearm and left shoulder with a projectile path crossing her chest, and she called 911 herself. She underwent surgery. A portion of a projectile remains in her body, and she was listed in stable condition as of Monday. Her son, 27-year-old Elijah Zion Bieniemy, who lived at the same residence along with two other people present at the time of the shooting, was arrested without incident, booked early Monday morning, and charged with malicious wounding, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and discharge of a firearm inside a dwelling, charges that carry a combined potential exposure that legal analysts place roughly in the 10 to 30-year range, though no conviction has occurred and he is presumed innocent. He is being held without bond at the Loudoun County Adult Detention Center, has a public defender listed as his attorney, and has a preliminary hearing scheduled for August 31st after his original arraignment was continued. Sheriff Mike Chapman has confirmed there were no previous incidents reported at the home. Eric Bieniemy was at Chiefs training camp in Missouri when the shooting occurred and has since left camp to be with his family, with passing game coordinator Joe Blemeyer and offensive line coach Andy Heck expanding their roles in his absence, and no confirmed timetable yet for his return. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office says the investigation remains ongoing, that there is no continuing threat to the public, and that no motive has been publicly released. That's the full, verified picture as it stands right now. As this case moves forward, through the preliminary hearing, through any additional court filings, and through whatever updates come from the Chiefs organization about Eric Bieniemy's return to the team, we'll continue tracking it and bringing you the confirmed facts as they emerge, rather than the rumors. If you want those updates as soon as they're available, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next development in this story. This video is for informational and news commentary purposes only. It is based on publicly available reporting from law enforcement statements, court records, and established news outlets at the time of publication. Details of this case are still developing, and some facts, including motive and additional circumstances, have not yet been confirmed by investigators. All individuals named in connection with criminal charges are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.